Sociology should and could be rigorous, cursed by philosophical ignorance and laced with unintended contempt for knowledge. Unfortunately, it's a laughing stock. I never thought I would speak in defence of sociology. The way ideology infested it repulsed me, developing utopian, self-justifying tendencies, while seeming to deny startlingly obvious evidence that, with scant effort, can be seen to point to the massive importance and potential of the study of society. Fixation on Victorian materialistic determinism at the heart of the closed system of Marxism seems to exclude all else, reducing it to an object of contempt. The paradoxes of reason appear in the transcript below. When academics grasp the blindingly obvious but culturally obscure, sociology could transform. Sociology is infected with the idea that it's a science. Physics envy. A study of society demands appreciation that incoherent, contradictory, and indefinite entities exist in the intersubjective reality. Intersubjective laws of existence differ from those of the physical world, where such permission is impossible. The distinction is elementally important. This podcast rambles a bit, with some repetition necessary to ram home the point, because it addresses a major cultural and mental block, causing serious damage in the UK, US, and across large parts of the world. It can be a hell of a struggle to neutralise cultural barriers. The next podcast will be entitled "Knowledge is Not Power. Anyone who disagrees is a blockhead." The core of the problem is a lack of understanding about the three domains of existence or reality: the physical, subjective, and intersubjective realms. Simple observation reveals that rules of existence differ in each. Non-contradiction is absolute in the physical, varies in the subjective, and applies in pure consciousness, inapplicable in unconscious memory. Meanwhile, in the intersubjective, contradictory, incoherent, and indefinite entities are the order of the day. Non-logic dominates the intersubjective, which includes society. Non-logic can be wise, coherent, sensible and kind, but equally stupid, chaotic, nonsensical and malevolent. Because something is non-logical does not preclude that it could be logical. It's only that it's not been subjected to tests of logic. You could refer to the second paradox of reason. Society is immensely complex, lacking physical existence and consciousness. It doesn't have agency. It's unable to think for its non-existent self. But despite complete impotence, it's massively influential. Conflating power with influence is a great mistake, typical of the poor nonsense that reduces modern academic sociology to a shadow of what it could be. Let me explain a bit more. The belief is that information or knowledge is power, as if the two were indistinguishable and both words being interchangeable. So strong and widespread, it's a cultural hang-up. Yet without the means to act on information, however significant, you're as impotent as the most ignorant person on earth. Likewise, in a position of authority, including the capacity to personally act, uninformed decision-making reduces someone to the impotence of unintended consequences, regardless how great their authority. It's true that passing on information to someone can trigger action, but they're not powerful. The power is with the recipient in authority who can act on information needed to make an informed decision. Sloppy, unrigorous thinking can lead to wrong conclusions rooted in statements such as society caused someone to do this and that, because that abstraction, by some kind of miracle, was conscious and had agency. Society is massively influential, but is utterly impotent. Humans engaged with it appear to accord society agency through the collective result of how each individual chooses to act on its influence. This is the most important sentence in this podcast, so I'll repeat it. Humans engaged with society appear to accord it agency through the collective result of how each individual chooses to act on its influence. This relationship between the collective and the individual is quite sophisticated and extensive. The collective is not the enemy of the individual, and the other way round. They're actually squared with one another. In another context, democracy makes that happen, but that's too long to explain here. So, the information is not power, and authority is not power. The expression applies: information combined with authority metamorphoses into social or political power. Sociology is working blind because it doesn't understand the nature of existence in the three domains. It can't see or grasp non-logical entities of the intersubjective and the subjective. Consequently, efforts to study society are bound to be divorced from humanity, the humans that create it. The subject is in such a mess, I can't call it a discipline, has massive potential. It could be the most important after philosophy, which, too, shot itself in the foot. If sociology were to identify non-logical identities in the intersubjective, how they interrelate and how society resides in and influences the non-logic of human memory, it could develop a rigour similar, perhaps not so absolute, to that of sciences associated with physical reality. Among other things, sociologists empowered, enlightened, should they give due respect to the nature of existence in the intersubjective, could see off today's contempt and ridicule to which their attempts are fashionably subject. They'll never be able to do this unless they bother to make astonishingly simple observations about the three domains. We all know human thought can be an utter mess, and our memories include all sorts of nonsense, half-baked ideas, as well as good stuff. The existence of non-logic in everyone is blindingly obvious. Even so-called philosophers, who might be a scratch more mentally aware and organised, are messy, myself included. Subjective memory is stuffed full of non-logic. See the second paradox of reasoning below. Then, anyone can know the intersubjective reflects unconscious subjective memory. A similar but vastly larger domain of non-logic, including all sorts of crazy political, religious and social beliefs, prejudice, religious leanings, etc., alongside sensible, constructive, well-intentioned altruistic leanings. This isn't rocket science, it's blindingly obvious. Finally, in the physical realm, barring little children, it's obvious stepping into the path of an oncoming lorry is liable to be lethal. Stones are hard, water is wet, and so on. Incoherent and contradictory things can't exist in the physical world. Rather than try to subject the three domains to logic and seemingly deny equal importance to observation and demonstration, academics box themselves into a corner by fixation on the belief that all three must conform to laws of existence of the physical realm. A strange obsession with Victorian materialist determinism reduced what could have been a rigorous study of society, sociology, to full-on exposure to public ridicule. Similar observation reveals we are more than simple logical creatures, and that the intersubjective, which includes society, is the cumulative product of subjectivity. But today's sociologists persist on ridiculous attempts to make sense of society by trying to turn it into a science, when it's much more. Things are massively more sophisticated and interesting. Sadly, quasi-Marxist 19th century determinism appears to dominate, but sociology is much more than scientific. It's debased by subjecting it to laws of physical reality without accommodation of its different laws of existence. Meanwhile, it's equally inappropriate to subject physical reality and its laws of existence to intersubjective entities and its rules of existence that make them possible. Dismal and primitive academic fashion has done and still does sociology appalling damage, and to society. So great an important subject is reduced to a laughing stock. Although academic sociologists may be unaware, so inculcated with materialistic determinism, they attempt to force what they think is scientific method onto society. Doing so is effectively in contempt of society, its raison d'être. No wonder people call sociology a Mickey Mouse subject, an unreal cartoon discipline. But at least, for all his silliness, at least Mickey Mouse was never so deluded. It's quite a critical thing I've just been banging on about, but I find it really difficult to get through to people the simple difference between influence and power. It is quite amazing. The lack of rigour in dealing with very important things is quite astonishing. And that sort of sloppy thinking opens the doors to ideological mishmash, which effectively shuts down, or certainly in the case of sociology, seems to shut down the entire subject, reducing it to a strange tautological dance, self-justification, with sort of strange, inappropriate attempts to subject it to the same laws that cover things like why it is that a high voltage and high amperage can kill someone stone dead. Now, the laws of the physical world are, although at a subatomic and atomic level are seemingly different, they're pretty brutally factual and hard to ignore otherwise. Whereas if you're looking at this sociological attempt to apply these rules to the intersubjective, to a realm where you can have incoherent and inconsistent and incomplete entities, then you're in a different scene, and more sophisticated scene in a way. For instance, in the intersubjective and in our unconscious non-logical thought, it is quite possible for two wrongs to make a right, or for two half-baked and rather stupid ideas to combine to create something which is really useful and interesting, and potentially of great use to society. Non-logic is highly sophisticated. If you were to apply the simple principle of logic, a contradiction can imply anything. The thing is, though, that logic doesn't really handle the word hence. change is very difficult for logic to deal with. It can look at it before and after and compare and say, well, to a certain extent, identify causation. But things like the paradox of the arrow and so on and so forth do tend to run a coach and horses through logic. For all the attempts of deontic logic and so on and so forth to somehow make change subject to logic, I don't think that's the case. I think it come a cropper. Far better to consider that we handle things with language that we can't imagine. Language is very, very effective like that. So, in effect, we can talk about society, culture, and abstractions. Now, you can't see an abstraction, you can't see society, you can't poke culture, but we can talk about them. Without a language, I don't think it's possible to mentally handle those things. Even though society persisted from most likely before the dawn of humanity, and people talk about a society and creatures other than humans, that is a society that exists, albeit they may not be conscious in their heads that it's there. We develop further, so society can, in a strange way, in the language itself, exist inside our heads, as much as being an abstract entity existing in intersubjective. This is highly sophisticated arrangement, but if we're going to get anywhere in sociology to be able to deal with this, you have to first of all accept that the laws of existence for things in the intersubjective realm are not the same as the laws of existence in the physical realm. Arguably, the subjective has a bit of both. In pure consciousness, I think that it obeys the law of non-contradiction, but in unconscious memory, which is the vast quantity inside our heads, is in the form of non-logic. That principle is partly demonstrated or shown by the second paradox of reason, which is in the transcript. The third paradox of reason deals with the significance of the word contradiction, according in meaning, which is relevant to this also. And the first paradox is something which possibly irrelevant to what we're talking about now, but it's very strongly linked to it, and that is that emotion is essential for reason to exist. I won't bore you. You look at the paradoxes, you see what I'm going on about. But I must emphasize, getting people to understand these simple observations is astonishingly difficult, and often the more intelligent people are, the greater struggle they have to get their minds around things, because they've developed a whole intellectual structure and framework in consistency with an approach developed in the Enlightenment and in the Age of Reason. And the grotesque paradox is, in the Age of Reason, those people talking about reason did not really realize what it was, what reason was. And that is, you need to suspend the law of contradiction to be able to stop logic from imploding on itself. The word contradiction, strictly speaking, is self-destructive, as is the law of non-contradiction. Now, an awful lot of people won't get that. They somehow have a mental block. They can't handle it. But essentially, to be able to reason, you have to break a law of logic, and that is the law of non-contradiction. And indeed, the law of non-contradiction depends upon breaking the law of contradiction to accept that word contradiction has meaning and is valid. It's quite interesting that it's simple. It's so simple that for many people they don't get it. And I think this is the problem that sociology faces. It's the inheritance from the age of enlightenment to the present day, where you saw philosophies develop afterwards, were nearly all of them a closed system. Immanuel Kant's philosophy, closed system, axiomatic. Leibniz, fantastic closed system. Descartes gave the world, but he wasn't quite as grandiose. And you go rolling on to Marxism and so on and so forth. and indeed the curse of ideology, which is, I think, the greatest enemy of humankind for the time being, more so than rockets and missiles, because ideology has its finger on the trigger of those, is down to a lack of appreciation of what it takes to be reasonable. If you thoroughly understand the three paradoxes of reason, ideology is doomed, which would be the greatest thing humanity could have. And then we can start going towards a better world. But for as long as intelligentsia and highly intelligent people are possessed of monumental artificial stupidity because they can't get their mind around things so simple, I'm afraid we're all going to have a very rough time. People will get there in the end. It'll be long after I'm dead. But then it's typical philosophers don't make a bundle of cash. And if they ever do get anywhere, it's usually, 100 years after they've snuffed it. So this is more for my own amusement, really. And because I know that it ain't going to happen when I'm around. But I find it very exciting. So that's what I get from it. Anyway, I hope you're well. It's a bloody hot day today. And when this drought ends, I'll be the first one to be dancing in the rain. Bye for now.